My name is Fay Hendricks. First thing I want to tell you, my wife says I mumble, which I probably do. So if you can't hear me, please hold up your hand and I'll try and speak louder. As I go along, I probably start to go down, and mumble too much. So anyhow, this is a World War II uniform. I only wore this in basic training and on my way home because I was in the Pacific. But in Europe, they wore this in combat, if you can believe that. But in the Pacific, I wore what they called fatigues, real baggy things. It was real hot in the Philippines, of course, and so this wouldn't work at all. I'm going to take it off because this jacket is really warm. And I'd like to have you pass it around and feel the weight of it. If you can imagine people wearing it all the time. It's getting a little tight, see? Another thing you'll notice on this uniform, there are no zippers. It's all buttons. This is in the day before zippers.
You want to talk about any of these things on here?
Yeah, well, I've got them on the shirt.
Oh, you got them on the shirt, that's right. There you go.
On this shirt and on the jacket, you'll find different things. This is overseas bars. Each of these bars represents 6 months overseas, so I have 18 months overseas. And this was my last unit that I was in. The last unit I was in was a Harborcraft company that checked, this was after the war, we checked the moorings in Manila Bay to see that the ships waiting to come into dock were moored in the right places. And I wasn't involved in the boats. They just gave me the job so I would have something to do while I was waiting to go home. And and this is my original unit, which is a Red Arrow, which is a 32nd Infantry Division. And infantry means ground troops. I was just a rifleman. The blue on my cap designates infantry. Each group has a different color of ribbon on their caps. So the Air Force, the artillery, the cavalry, all have a different color on here. What else have I got? Anyhow, this is PFC, which was probably the lower rank. This one step above the private. And in an infantry unit, very seldom did you get advanced because you would only get advanced to replace someone with a higher rank than you if you were qualified to do it. So, and I only went up one bunch. I want to start out first by telling you my high school days here. Some of the things that we did. I was in high school at your age, right in the middle of World War II. And everyone was so patriotic, and everything was dedicated towards the war effort. And I was in the FFA, and we would go out and go in the groves and pick up steel and anything that could be used to be melted down, to be used for weapons and implements. And right across the road over here where you park your pickups is where we had a big pile of the scrap iron. They'd come and get it and haul it away and use it for the war effort. Our mothers saved grease, all the bacon grease and everything that they had left, and put it in cans and brought it in, and they used this for ammunition. Yeah. And in the school, We had bond and stamp drives. We would contribute money towards the war effort to be used for our war effort. The whole nation got behind World War II immediately, and that's all we really thought of. And it was necessary. Women, for the first time, went to work in war factories. You guys studied that. And before that, we were mostly just mothers at home. But the men, so many of the men were gone, they need to be replaced, so the ladies took their place. We had gas and tire rationing. We could only get 3 gallons of gas a week. In order to get gas, you had to have a stamp, and then you could go get your 3 gallons of gas, show the stamps, give the stamps to the people at the service station, and that was all you could have for the day, the week. Tires, you couldn't get a tire unless you go to the ration board and prove to them that was absolutely necessary. And then they'd give you a slip, and you could go down to the service station, present that, and you could get a tire for your vehicle. But you had to be able to show that it was very important, otherwise you couldn't get it. Speed limit over the whole United States was 35 miles an hour. That every road in the United States. And that was set at that speed so that they said it would save the most fuel. Everyone was thinking, like I say, for the war effort. And no one went above it, because everyone that I ever knew, that's all they thought about at that time, was to support the country and to support our troops as far as to contribute to the war effort. I have groceries, meat, sugar, all these things were rationed. A woman went into, or anyone went into a grocery store to buy sugar. They had the ration books. This is a ration book that my grandmother, or not my grandmother, my wife's mother had 4 ration books. And they'd tear a little stamp out when you would get, say, sugar, or you can pass that down. And just take a look at them. And you couldn't buy it without a stamp, so you only had so many. And everyone would buy it because that's all you thought about, was getting the war over and contributing to the effort. But, I would hope that today, if it got to such a situation, that the people in America would unite like they did at that time. We were very afraid. You know, at the time, the United States was not the powerful country that it is today. Germany, Japan, England were all much more powerful than the United States. Our Navy was pretty much wiped out at Pearl Harbor, and our Air Force was pretty much wiped out at Hickam Field in Pearl Harbor and Clark Field in the Philippines. So, and we weren't prepared for the war. We had been building munitions and trucks and tanks and things and sending them over to England for them to fight in the war. And so the United States was not the power that you think of today. There were submarines that cruised the shores on the East Coast and the West Coast. And they were spotted there. In fact, if you look back in some history, one submarine shelled a city in California. And you just don't think of that today, that anything like that could be. They say they were sending incendiary balloons, and they'd go over the United States and drop into the forests up in Oregon and have forest fires. It was a totally different time. But, so anyhow, when I was between my junior and senior year, I became 18 years old. And I didn't, at 18 years old, I could volunteer for the military. And my dad didn't want me to go, I knew, and he had deferred. If you were in a related industry for the war effort, which agriculture was considered, then, and they felt you were really needed, you could get a deferment, a 2C deferment, where you would stay home and farm, or say that you were in a factory, if you were building airplanes or something like that, you could get a deferment. And otherwise, it was pretty much everybody went. Well, I wanted to go, so on my 18th birthday, I hitchhiked to El Point and enlisted, and without my folks' consent. And my dad was not very happy with me, I'll guarantee you that. But, and I thought at the time, and this was wrong, I thought, well, my dad wants me to stay home and help him farm. And I carried that in my mind for many years. And then I don't know how, but I got to realize my dad was a World War I veteran. And he didn't want me to go because he didn't want me to experience the things that he had to experience. And I was judging him wrong, which couldn't easily be done. But anyhow, I made an agreement with the superintendent that if I wanted to graduate from high school, because my mother gave up so much for me to go to school over the years, and she wanted us all to be high school graduates. She was. Most people didn't in those times. The 8th grade was about the end of your education. So I talked to the superintendent and some of the teachers, and they set up a deal where I could take 7 subjects the first semester in my senior year, and 1 correspondence course, which would take the 8 subjects that were required, and I could graduate at mid-semester. So in December, I left and went into the military. And then in the spring, I graduated with the rest of my class. I was gone at the time. My mother received my diploma. I understand they had a chair up on the stage and had a flag over it. And my mother went out and got my diploma. And I never saw it until I came home 2 years later. But it was something that was cooperative. The teachers cooperated with me, and I'm sure they made some allowances. I went out for football and carried 7 subjects at the same time. And when I was about to leave, I came into school, and my English teacher, she was married to a man that had been in the Army for 4 years, and she hadn't seen him for 4 years. In those days, when you went overseas, you didn't come home until it was over. That's when you left the States, you knew you were not coming back until it was over. And he'd been there overseas for 4 years. And she came up to me and she said, "Fay, you don't deserve this. but I'm going to give you an A just so that I'm sure you'll graduate. So this was a very nice lady. But anyhow, that was my high school career. I left, went to Fort Snelling, took my physical, went from Fort Snelling, was sworn in, went from Fort Snelling to a camp outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, Camp Robinson, Arkansas. It was an IRTC camp, they called it, Infantry Replacement Training Camp. And that's what we were taught. As an infantryman, you learn any number of things, great many things. First thing they have to get you is in good physical condition, which I was pretty good physical condition because of being young and having been out for football and everything. So, and working on a farm. But some of the guys that I was with had a terrible time getting in shape. And they taught you, we had mornings, we'd have a class like this. Afternoons, we'd take what we were supposedly to learn that morning and put it into practice. Say that we were taking bayonet training. We learned how to use a bayonet. They taught you in the morning. In the afternoon, we'd go out with dummies and use the bayonets. You have to learn to use about 5 different firearms, rifles. You use mortars, you use bazookas, you use flamethrowers, grenades. Each one of these things has to be taught. And each one of the weapons, the rifles, you have a day that you're on. You have to learn how to take it apart, how to fire it, how to keep it clean. So it was a very concentrated course. Normally the course was 16 months or 16 weeks long. They shortened it to 13 weeks because at the time that I went in was in the time of the Battle of the Bulge, and things were not going that great in the Pacific. We were just starting to come to where we were doing well in the Pacific, and the losses were very heavy in both areas. We were fighting a war in 2 fronts. You had that in school here, I'm sure. But it required a lot of people. At one time, there were 11 million men in the service at one time. And so that's why it was so the studying and the training was so concentrated. We were up at 5 in the morning, and we usually went till 11 or 12 at night. And it was a long day, and we did get Sundays off during basic training. So I completed the course, and again, because of the pressures at the time, I got a 3-day delay en route, they called it. Normally, they would have given them a month to go home, and then you go overseas. I was home 3 days, and then got on the troop ship and went to, or troop train, and went to the West Coast. I was in Fort Ord for probably 3 or 4 days. They picked us up in the truck, took us to the dock, and loaded us on a ship headed for we knew not where. We understood it was probably going to be the Pacific because we were going out of California. But we didn't have any idea, and they didn't tell you where you were going. After about a day, they loaded us up in trucks, took us to the dock in Oakland. We got aboard the ship probably about noon, and we were waiting till darkness because at the time, everything was dark in the California and on both coasts, everything was blacked out at night. No lights in the city at all. Traffic, very little traffic. It was for protection of the ships that were leaving with troops. That's what it was pretty much for. We left at midnight, went under the Golden Gate Bridge, remember it very well. It was totally blacked out. I looked back at San Francisco and it was black, dark, you couldn't see anything. And we were talking among ourselves. We had a model, the Golden Gate in 48. We thought if we could get back in 48. This was 45. And if we could get back in 48, we felt it was our goal. And this was kind of a slang, I guess. And luckily, I came back in 18 months, which things turned around, everything worked well. But we left from San Francisco, went directly to Hawaii, pulled into Pearl Harbor, our ship did. And in Pearl Harbor, the harbor was just full of ships. And there was a convoy that formed, and we joined the convoy, and within the next day, we pulled out the whole convoy and headed, we didn't know where. They never told us anything, and I suppose that's the way it was done, but the ship was packed solid with people. We slept in our bunks. We would, when you got out of your bunk, you went above deck, and the guys that were above deck went down and slept in your bunk. You just traded. And so there was a double load of guys. After we left Pearl Harbor, it totally switched. We went, every 15 minutes, we would change course. We would just zigzag all the way across the Pacific from there. And the reason, I guess, what they told us afterwards was that it took a submarine that long to zero in on a ship. And so then you would change course and then throw them off. And this was what the plan was. And it took 4 days to get to Hawaii, and the whole trip to the Philippines took a month. So because of the slowness of the trip. It was, our ship was totally blacked out. If you went above decks, if you were above deck at night, there was no light. You couldn't see the rest of the ships in the convoy, but you knew they were out there. And in the daytime, you could see way out in the distance, destroyers going back and forth, back and forth. And of course, they're faster ship than we were on. And they were picking up, if anything was ahead of us, they would pick it up and protect us. We saw them all the way over. As we got, we had no idea where we were going. It was getting warmer, and we were in the Pacific. And as we went along, probably about 2 weeks out, I saw some islands. You could see trees off in the distance. And the convoy pulled up, stopped, and I thought, well, here it is. So on our ship, we had landing craft, like you've probably seen if you've ever seen these war movies where they load you into a craft, you kneel down in it, and as you take off, they take you out and put it in a big circle so everyone was loaded at one time and ready to go. And then they head for the island, and when we got into this first island, I heard the bottom of it crunch. They're flat bottom boats, and you couldn't see out over the front of it. You could see the sides, and the deck the front deck dropped down, and they hollered go, and we took off, ran onto shore, and got onto shore. We were all standing around, and they said, well, this is just a practice landing, guys. Get back on, we'll take you back to the ship. Well, we did, and we had you've probably seen the movies, net rope that they threw over the side after they had put the landing craft in, that you went down to get into your landing craft. The nets are about that wide, and it's heavy rope, and you just crawl down it. Well, we had to crawl back up those nets to get back into the ship, which we did, and we took off. Still didn't know where we were at all. We took off, and probably 3 or 4 days later, same thing. We stopped, and they lowered the boats over the side. We went over the nets, down, ready to go, and we started. We were out circling, and then everybody got on, and away we went towards the shore. And I heard it hit the coral again. The front dropped down, and it was about 100 yards to the shore. We evidently hit a coral reef out there. And so they all let go, and we waded in with water about up to our waist, got on the shore, and they said, well, you guys, it's just a practice landing again. Get back on the boats, and we did, and we went back to the ship. And this time, is talking about smart thinking, they had grounded 100 yards from the shore, but once we all got out of the landing craft, they could go farther in, so they pulled right up to the shore, and we got in, and then it wouldn't pull off of the shore. So we had to get out, wade back out. They had to back out to where we were originally, and we got on and went back to the boat, got on, and I don't know how many days later, same thing. We came into a big bay, and I found out later it was Lingayen Gulf. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, here's the Philippines. This is Lingayen Gulf right here. This is Manila Bay, but this is Lingayen Gulf. And we came into this gulf, and it's big. It's a big area. And it was noon. They, same thing, landing craft over the side, nets, crawl down into the boats, big circles, and away we go. And it was thundering and raining and just horrible. And landed, got into the beach, dropped down, went in, and this time we stayed. Luckily, there was no one there. We were expecting a reception, but there was nobody there. And we got the whole shipload of us, the whole convoy unloaded at Lingayen Gulf. And we had to wait. This was right about noon. And we waited until about 3 o'clock to get organized to take off. They told us then we were in the Philippines on the island of Luzon. Of course, I hadn't studied anything about the Philippines, so I still didn't have any idea where it was. But there were wild bananas growing and coconuts laying on the sand all around us. And we were hungry because we hadn't had anything to eat since morning. So, and they told us, well, you can eat the bananas and coconuts, but be careful. If you eat too many bananas, it'll cause diarrhea, so don't be careful that you can have them. And they were absolutely delicious. I've never eaten bananas as well as those that are right off the tree, right. And the coconuts, you could punch the eye out of the coconut, drink the milk, and it was sweet, really good. And we would crack them open and eat the meat, and it was very good. I bought coconuts here at home. You wouldn't, they're not like the coconut cider that you get that are fresh. It's a totally different thing. But then about, I suppose about 3 o'clock, I would guess, they formed us all up again in units. We started marching down through the jungle on a little narrow road or trail, and marched through there until in the night sometime. It was dark. We came upon a narrow gauge railroad, and there was a locomotive, an old locomotive hooked to it. Narrow gauge means that everything's about half size. The rails are about half the distance apart of the ones down here. And they had box cars waiting there for us, and the train was ready to go. And we got in the box cars and closed the doors, and we were so packed in there that you couldn't sit down. Everybody was standing up, just packed together. And we traveled probably for until almost morning, and then we stopped and got out and started marching down a road. And I went through a little town. I found out afterwards, little barrio, they call the small towns barrios. And as we went through, I remember I heard a rooster crow. They have a lot of chickens in the Philippines. And so it was just like home, because I was raised on a farm. And I thought, this is just like home. And it was just daylight, just starting to get daylight. And we marched through this town, and probably for another half hour down the road, and then made a right up into the mountains. Went to what they call the replacement camp, which was set up tents to where you would wait to be assigned to a particular unit, and which we did. Anyhow, at this replacement camp, I met one of my good friends, Merrill Johnson. He's the grandfather of the twins. You guys all knew the twins. And he and I visited. We were in there for about 3 days, and every night we just sit out and talk about home, and it was a great feeling. But again, everything total black. You couldn't have any lights anywhere. And Merrill and I would sit out there and watch, and as they had around us what they call a perimeter. You've probably heard of perimeters. You set up 4 machine guns, 2 firing, one firing this way, one this way, and then one in this corner, one this way, and one this way. And it would, at any time that they felt they would want to, the fellows in charge of the guns would just fire a burst. And that was so it didn't set up a certain timing or anything. So the people, the Japanese couldn't get through that, or they could get through the perimeter, but they didn't know when they could get through. But they had Japanese around us, and we'd set out there at night. And then one of the things, the guys liked to write a letter home from them. And Merrill and I were sitting out there, and the way that we do it, we had no light. And so the guys would take an army blanket, throw it over them, and get under it. And then for a little light, we'd have a little can of what we call dubbin. It was like grease that you put on your combat boots to keep them so they'd be waterproof. And so they take them and a rifle patch and put the patch in the can and then light it like a candle. Well, this one guy was writing a letter home. He set the blanket on fire, and he set the tent on fire, And we had all kinds of light, I'll tell you. And Merrill and I were sitting there, we took off, and we're trying to beat it out, you know, and a bunch of guys helping us too. And here comes some of the officers, and they were chewing, you know, because they thought we set it on fire. And, but eventually they realized we were trying to put it out rather than burn it down. So we didn't get too big a trouble. A few days later, they took me and they took Merrill in a different trucks, and they took us out into the jungle, and were distributing us to units that needed a replacement for someone that had been killed that day. And so, as we went along, if they need 2 replacements, they would drop 2 guys off. If one, they'd drop 1 off. It's whatever they needed for that unit. And I happened to be dropped off alone. It was about 5 in the evening, as I remember, and truck stopped out on this little trail and said, "Hendricks, you're off here." I jumped out, and I was standing in the middle of the road, didn't know what to do. I was all alone. And out of the trees came a man, looked like an old man to me, and member of the U.S. Army. And he come over to me and he said, "Do you have a place for the night?" And I said, "No, I sure don't." Well, he said, "You come with me." He took me back into the jungle and little ways, and here was his outfit in there. And he introduced me to all of his friends, you know. His name was Joe Engelman. He was 6 years older than me. He'd been over there for 3.5 years. And of course he had a beard, you know, and everything. And clothes were dirty, and you didn't get to wash your clothes, you didn't get baths or anything like that. But the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me, because he was an old veteran, respected by everybody in the unit, and if he was my friend, and they all accepted me. Otherwise, I was just a dumb kid that probably would have been replaced that next night, because I didn't know what I was doing, and I wouldn't have gotten anybody to help me because, you know, I would have been in danger to them. So it's one of the great things that happened to me in my life. And Joe and I went on together all through the time afterwards, and he was looking out for me, and we became very close friends. I worked checkpoints with him, did everything with him. We just became a team. And after he came home way ahead of me, of course, and it was right, because they sent us home by points. And at one point for every month you were in the service, another point for every month that you were overseas, and points, like 5 or 10 points for every commendation or medal you got. Joe had a Bronze Star, so he got extra points for that. He had lots of points. He went home way ahead of me, and which was right. And I had to wait my turn to go. I had very few points. And he and I, he lived in eastern Iowa, got married, raised a family, and every fall he and I would, either he would visit me or I would visit him. And our wives got to know each other real well. We were still close as you could be. He passed away 2 years ago. I think of him all the time, but he used to, I used to tell him, "Joe, I owe my life to you," which I did. And he'd say, "Fay, you and I won the war, which we didn't, but that was a stretch of a little bit. But we were, you understand how close we were. But anyhow, I should go back to an incident that happened on the trip over. We hit a typhoon, the whole convoy did, and it's a real high wind at sea. And the nose of our ship would go completely underwater. And then I was above deck part of the time. We were all up there. You didn't even have room to sit down on the deck. There's so many of us. And then when it had come up, then the water run off the fantail of the back of the ship. And it run right through where we were standing. But, and then the ship doesn't go like this, it goes like this, you know. And a lot of the guys got sick, luckily I didn't get sick. But in the middle of this thing, one day I was standing there, it lasted for 3 days. And I was standing by a 20mm anti-aircraft gun. They had them on the deck. And had a canvas tarp over it, protect them from water. And I looked over, and here sat our gull, out there in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles from anything, and found this ship, was sitting on that gun. And it was close to me. I went over and I picked that gull up, and he sat on my hand, never moved one bit. And I went around and showed all my friends this gull, you know, and they were amazed too. And I sat back on the gun, and I went down. It was about time for me to take my turn down below. So I went down below and to sleep. Next morning, the typhoon was gone. I went up to the deck, and the bird was gone. But I always felt that it was a message to me, because I was scared to death. I didn't even know how to swim. I had never even been in a rowboat. But I always felt it was a message to me, and I felt so much better about it. Here was this little girl that found our ship, and it was a message that I was going to be okay. I had many things happen to me. I've been really blessed, really blessed. While I was in this replacement camp, we had 12-man tents, and they had just opened on the ends. It was hot. I was laying on the ground, sleeping on my back, and something woke me up. And I looked up, and here was a chap over me with a knife. And he slammed it into the ground. I saw him jump and holler and over the side and put it right in the ground where I was laying. And I jerked it up, away he went into the night. Everybody in that replacement camp went looking for him. Couldn't find him, of course, in the night. He got away. But what woke me up? If I hadn't woke up, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I could tell you so many instances in my life when, for some reason, maybe I was meant to come and talk to you. I was meant to be able to have a nice family, have a great family. Things went great for me. I don't have a pile of money, but I have a wife that treats me great, kids that treat me great, and I just had a wonderful life. And then meeting Joanne, you know, how many times would that happen to a young kid? I wasn't much older than you guys. And after I met Joe, we were switched to go up to northern Luzon in the 32nd Division, the Red Arrow Division. And that's where Joe and I spend our time. In northern Luzon, in the mountains, there's not a lot written, I don't think, about our division, but it was, if you look, our division had more combat hours than any other division in World War II. Now that's quite a record. And you might think that's can't be because there were divisions in Italy. Well, the 32nd Division was sent to Australia under MacArthur, when MacArthur left the Philippines. They were trained to, this was not when I was with them, of course. They were trained as one of the first divisions to hit the islands as they fought their way back. And I'm very proud of that Red Arrow. It's a very proud division. But I wanted to show you a few things. This is a helmet. It's a steel helmet. We didn't wear them, but I had it with me because you could shave on them. You could use water. You take this helmet liner out, and I had a monkey that I had caught over there, a baby monkey, and he used to take a bath in this helmet. And I've got a picture of him, so I'll pass that around too. They are so heavy on their neck. Here's a picture of my monkey taking a bath in that helmet. He used to, here's another picture of him with my buddy. He was real small when I got him, and he'd sit on my shoulder. Well, first he got very tame, and he'd go up a tree, and I couldn't get him to come down. I'd try and get him to come down, he'd just chatter at me. And then if I'd walk away, he'd be right next to me. And he would ride around on my shoulder sometimes, and the Filipino girls would be walking around with these big trays on their head, and they'd have bananas that they'd picked, and all kinds of fruits and stuff that they would be out selling to people. And I'd walk right beside them, and they were short, and then he would just take the banana out and put it in my pocket. I had these fatigues on with a big pocket. He'd take 2 bananas out, put them in my pocket, and then we'd go off, and he'd have one, and I'd have one, so. And then he'd take a bath in it, and, but then when I got ready to go home, I took him out and turned him loose. So we went out into the jungle and let him go. And then 2 years ago, my son and I went back to the Philippines to see the area, and we were on Corregidor, and I kept saying, I don't see any monkeys. And we were looking around, because it was, Corregidor has become a jungle now, and off in the distance, sitting on a fence, were 3 wild monkeys that my son took a picture of. But here's another thing I wanted to show you, a picture of me standing in one of those boxcars. When my son and I went back, we went up into Angeles and San Fernando, and there was a boxcar sitting in a museum, just like the one I rode that night. And so I got to stand in the boxcar and they took a picture of me. So, but another thing I wanted to tell you about was, and this is a neat thing, it was Easter, I'm sure, over there, or close to Easter, and we had a USO show come to entertain us. I never saw any of the big USO shows, but I saw once in a while we'd get a small one where they'd come out with just a flatbed truck, and they'd maybe have two guys playing guitars or something, and then they'd have some girls dance or sing to us. And they just do it right out in the jungle and in the trees in the clearing. And this one night, we knew it was, they were coming. The USO has a soft spot in my heart. They're really a great organization. This USO stands for United Service Organizations. All the churches and service organizations in the United States provide the USO. There's no federal money put into this thing. But this particular night, they were playing, and there were three girls up there dancing, and they had these little bonnets on, and they were playing the song, "Put on your Easter bonnet," with all the frills upon it, and all this stuff, and dancing on the truck. And we were all sitting out on the grass watching it. It was a great show. And then during the singing, they came down and they came into us. And Joe and I happened to be sitting on the outside of this group. And one young girl come along with her bonnet on, little bonnet, and she put it on my head, tied it under my neck here, you know. And she bent over me, and man, did she smell pretty, I'll tell you. You know, she had perfume on, and it was one of the highlights of my life. But, and of course, everybody gave me a hard time about it afterwards, but I wish I had that on it, but it got lost somewhere. You got quite a bit of time left, right?
You got about half an hour, Fay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. If you'll notice on that picture, there's those little short people. There's a grandma and her grandchildren. And this was taken 2 years ago, I'm going to say. And those are egrets, they call them. And at the time, very few people, that's a full size, very few people have ever seen egrets. You can look it up on your computer. It's I-G-R-O-I-T, egrets. And they were, at that time, they aren't anymore, they were tribes of people that stayed out into the trees, that didn't have anything to do with other people, Americans or anyone else. And for some reason, Joe and me and our patrol met them out in the jungle, and they came up to us and they invited us to go with them for supper. And so we followed them back into the jungle, and the men, all they wore was a G-string. They had no other clothes on, and the ladies had a wrap around their waist, a skirt. That's what they wore. The men, if they could find a steel helmet like this, they'd probably wear the steel helmet. And if they could find some combat boots off a guy laying somewhere, you'd see him standing around that night with a G-string, combat boots, and a steel helmet on. Pretty remarkable. Only about this tall. And they took us back into the jungle, and this is something else. I've told other guys this, and no one has ever seen this. They had a dog tied to a tree, and I don't know, he was just skin and rail, skin and bones. He was just completely cleaned out. I don't know if they'd given him something as a laxative. And they had a bowl of rice, they sat in front of him, and he ate the whole bowl of rice, and he just stuffed it down. And then they took sticks and beat him to death, and just kept beating him until beating him on the stomach. And then they took sticks and put it in his mouth and in his butt, and put him over fire and turned him until they burned all his hair off, and kind of cooked him. And then they laid him on a big leaf, and they invited us to help. They ate him, everything but the bones. The intestines are full of rice. Of course, they ate the rice, and these were very primitive savages. The one thing the men wore was a big bowler knife. That was the one thing they had. And I have never met anyone else that has ever met an eater. But there again, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. But on this trip, my son and I made a stop at a museum to see at Park Field. And this grandma and her two little grandchildren were standing there, and they were selling these homemade bows and arrows. And of course, now I suppose they become, more civilized. So that was kind of neat. And this Filipino that's standing beside him, that's towering, he only stands about this high. So you can imagine how short that little grandma was. But there's again, one of my fortunate things. They took me down after the war was all over and everything. Well, one of the things that the 32nd Division had to do when the war was declared over, General Yamashita was in charge of all the troops in the Philippines. And he received orders, I guess, to surrender to the United States Army. And he surrendered to the 32nd Division. I didn't see him. VJ Day, which is in September. And he had 10,000 troops with him at the time he surrendered in northern Luzon. And he abandoned them, maybe because they had been taught by the Code of Bushido that it was an honor to die and a dishonor to surrender. And if you died for your country, you were very honored, and your family would be honored. If you surrendered and were taken back to Japan, this is what I understand, then it would be a dishonor to the family, and you would not be, you would be considered a traitor. So those 10,000 Japanese, Yamashita surrendered and abandoned them, and he brought, I understand, 13 of his high-ranking aides with him and surrendered to the general of the 32nd Division. And his troops and the rest of his officers took off and continued to fight on northern Luzon. And we became involved in what they call a mopping up operation, and which was to, and they would raid the Filipinos, barrios, they would raid us at night. In fact, they were running out of supplies and running out of food, and it was standard operating procedure for us. If we ate in the morning, we'd line up to go through a food line in the dark. You check the person in front of you and the person behind you to make sure he was an American soldier, because they would get in our food lines and try and get food. But It was a terribly bad time. It was a job for the 32nd Division to eliminate it. That's about all I could say. And because they would not surrender. And I gave Mr. Huck a letter on this. It's a known fact that our division, and I was there, killed probably 9,000 of them or more. And probably we had 50 surrender. That is probably, I don't think I've ever told you this before, but it's probably the cause of more nightmares for me than anything else that I ever had or did. It's a cause of, at one time I wrote poetry. It's probably the cause of some of the poetry I wrote. Because at midnight or afterwards sometimes I'd wake up and this stuff would just roll over and over in my mind. And the only way I could get to sleep was go and write it down. And I wrote it in poetry form, and then the next morning my wife would type it up, and good or bad, it was part of my life. And then a few years ago it disappeared, and I don't have that anymore. And but that I don't know the exact figure, but I think they say there was a fellow that was traveled with the 32nd Infantry Division. It was originally a Michigan, Wisconsin National Guard unit. And he wrote for the Detroit Press. He wasn't in the military, he was a newsman. And he wrote letters almost every day, I guess, to the Detroit Press about different guys in our unit. And he would write from Michigan. And he would write and tell their particular story, what they did that day, and kind of about. And it was for the parents and grandparents back home to be reassured that they were doing fine. And so he wrote this article about our unit. I think, if I remember right, our casualties were about 40-some hundred in that. But anyhow, I was sent down then, after all this was over, I was sent down to Manila to wait my turn to go home. So I went home. And to keep me, give you something to do so you don't go get in trouble or something, I became a permanent guard. I had no skills. So I guarded everything you could imagine in Manila. At the time we had, Manila was totally destroyed. It took 1 month for, I think it was the 31st Division and many units to go through Manila. And they fought from building to building, and every building was destroyed practically. And so they were taking, like sometimes I'd have to guard an old bombed out building or something and just kind of had walls and a roof, and they were going to make an office out of it. They'd have the typewriters in there preparing to make offices, and so I'd have to guard it at night. And I guarded from midnight till 6 in the morning, daylight. And I guarded everything you could imagine. One of the things that I guarded was a place where there was a common grave of Americans. It was, I don't know how they knew they were in there. It was on the banks of Intramuros, which was a big old Spanish fort, and it was built up of dirt. And they would pick me up in the morning in a truck, take me to a Japanese prison camp with the Japanese in it, and pick up maybe a half a dozen Japanese, and then they'd haul us to this place, and it was a high bank, and they'd set, well, I don't remember, half dozen to a dozen boxes, about this wide and about 6 feet long, and one small box. And the Japanese would dig up the remains of these guys that had been buried there during the first, we had troops in Manila, and when the Japanese came and took over the Philippines, they eradicated many American troops, and these guys evidently were buried there. And how they knew, I don't know, but all we had left was pretty much bones that had been in there about 4 years, 3 or 4 years. And it was kind of their job to dig them out. And I was to see that in each box there was a skull or a rib cage or arm bones and leg bones, and enough to make up a person. You couldn't pick out people because they had all been buried together. And then we did this for probably a week. And then I had a little box that if there was a ring or a watch or something like that buried with them, and they'd find it, I put that in that little box. And then after about 5 o'clock in the evening, the truck would come and pick us all up again, take us back to the prison camp. The guys, Japanese, would get out, and then they'd take me home. Next morning, same thing again. But while I was in there, I had they wouldn't leave me, because if they did, the Filipinos would kill them in a minute. So I didn't have to guard them, except to protect them, really, and they knew that. So I couldn't speak any Japanese, but I have a book on Japanese that I could look at, and it would tell if you wanted to say a phrase or something, like say, please, you owe me. And then it would say how to say it, and I could come close enough to where I could say, you do this or you do that, and if they told me something, I could kind of understand what it was. Well, I smoked at the time, and I was smoking one time, at least we weren't, I'd say, real friendly, but we had, over the time, we had kind of formed a bond, or whatever you want to call it. And this one Japanese prisoner, who was kind of the head of it, came up to me, and I had this lighter. And somehow, through this thing, we got it that he wanted me to let him take it for the evening, and he wanted me to put something on a piece of paper that he could put on this lighter. And so I did. Now, I had a person jump me one time and say, well, why would you let a prisoner have a lighter? For God's sakes, you'd be in trouble. Well, there's a little screw in here that I could take out, and then take the flint out so it will not light. But here it is, and here's what he put on there. That's my name and serial number, and pass it around so everybody can see it. But that's something I've kept ever since, and
Okay, you got about 10 minutes.
okay. I do have some other things that I pass around. I picked this up, it's a part of the airplane, is a Japanese arrow that I tried loose. This is my class ring. It's probably the only year that you'll ever see a class ring that's hollow. And that was to save the gold for the war effort. This is a can opener. The hole is to put on your dog tag chain, and you could open the sea ration cans with that. Just that thing will work just perfect. I should tell you, I hold no animosity, hatred, or whatever you want to call it, for the Japanese whatsoever. They were soldiers doing what they were told to do, just like I was told to do. They were good fighters. But anyhow, I wound up in the hospital in northern Luzon in part of that time. And it so happened, it was really hot up in there, in this hospital. It was a big tent, and they had us all in iron cots. And it so happened, they had a young Japanese prisoner of war that was an orderly. They made him an orderly in this tent. And he and I got to be pretty good friends. I was up there probably 2 weeks. And it was hot in there, terrible. And he was younger, I think, than me even. He was just a real young boy. And so through, I don't know how, he would bring me water to drink, a glass of water, and I would give him a couple cigarettes of mine, and we could just look in each other's eyes. We couldn't talk, we didn't know how this corresponded. But we became, in those 2 weeks, we became pretty close. And I've always been happy that probably he got to go home, and I got to go home. And he had, hopefully he has a family over there, and I have a family. And I think of him quite often, and I hope he thinks of me. And I wonder if he thinks, well, how that guy came out, you know. And, I should go on a little more too. He had, you know, they had, originally they had the hair all cut real short, just right down to the skin. And of course, by the time he was gone through all of this, it was out like an afro, just out like this. And so, after we got feeling a little better, we decided maybe we should give him a haircut. And of course, he didn't know what we were doing. And we sat him on a chair, and one of the guys got a scissor out, a long scissor, and he just held on the side of that chair, and I could tell he was just terrified, because he didn't know what we were going to do with that scissor. And so we started clipping his hair and cut it all down short. And we were having a big time about it, probably half a dozen of us laughing, having a good time. And then after we got it cut down, somebody said, well, you should have it shaved. So someone had a straight razor. You know, a straight razor is where you fold out. And so we're going to shave his head. And that poor kid just froze in that chair, because I know he thought we were going to kill him. And he just sat there so still, and we shaved him all down. And of course, a lot of us had never used a straight razor, so I admit we did make him probably. And poor kid had blood coming down the side of his face, but, and then when he got done, we just, he was happy, but that's one of the reasons, probably, that one time Millie and I went to Hawaii, and they had a, this was for our 40th anniversary, and there were just all kinds of Japanese young people coming and taking pictures of everything, and they were on vacation from Japan. And Millie said, does this bother you, Fay? I said, no, why would it? And they had nothing to do with this. And this young boy didn't either, really. So I don't know how I can better explain to you. There is no reason I would have any no feelings toward those people at all. And now they've become my allies. So, but anyhow, it came my time to go home. And I got on the ship. We pulled out into the middle of the day, and I had to refuel this ship. And I was surprised. They pulled a big tanker up beside us. We were out in the middle of the bay, and they started with pipes across. And when we started, we were way up in the air. The tanker was way down below us. And when we got through, the tanker was way up in the air, and we were down below. It took that much fuel, of course, to go all the way across. And there were little Filipino boys that had swam out there and were swimming around our boat, and we'd throw coins over, and they'd go down in the water, and then they'd go down and get them, terrific swimmers, and they'd put them in their mouth, and they'd show us that they had them, and when they got their mouths full, they'd leave, And then we started for home. It took 15 days. It took 30 days to get there, 15 days to get home. Right straight across. And again at midnight, would you believe? We came into San Francisco Bay, went under the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was lit up with lights. Of course, over in Manila, there were no lights. Everything was destroyed. It was just terrible. But here it was. All those lights. The city was bright against the hill. It's a very steep hill. If you've ever been to San Francisco, it's really rough area. And from the ocean out there, you could just see it bright. And as we went under that Golden Gate Bridge, I can only imagine how Joe felt, but my heart was about ready to break. We had life preservers on, and I took mine off, and I thought, we all did. I thought we could hit that bridge just like nothing broke. But it was just such a feeling you can't believe. To see the lights and to see the United States again. And then we pulled into the dock and were unloaded. And I was in a big building waiting to get on a train to go up and get my separation papers at Seattle. And I had heard that my brother, Bob, was leaving Japan, and I thought, well, nothing to do, I'll just go walking around. And I'd heard that a ship had come in from Japan. So I went walking around, and here was my brother Bob sitting on a bunk. And so he and I had a good visit. Hadn't seen him since I had left home, 2 years before. And we went to Seattle together. We were discharged together. And Tom Farley's dad was there too. And we got on the train together, got all our clothes and everything, and discharge papers. Went home by train together to Fargo, and then down into Hayward. And my dad was driving along the road. brother and I were also in the basic training camp together. Like I say, how lucky can you get? And we rode the same car home, met my mother and other brother and sister. And my brother Bob passed away about almost a year ago now. He would have been 63, March the 16th, day before St. Patrick's Day. We were very close. We went through, when we were little kids, my mother wanted us to go to a parochial school. So she took Bob and I to the parochial school. He was 2 years older than me, so he had been there 2 years. And we boarded in there. And Bob took care of me. I was just a little runt, and he took care of me and saw that I got up in the morning, get my clothes on, get my bed made, and all those things. So,
Got about a minute.
any questions?
You guys got a question or two?
I'll try and answer them. No questions?
They're probably super excited about school lunch. Right, Miss Stanley? Well, thank you very much, Fay, again this year. If you guys want to just shake his hand and say thank you as you leave, I appreciate that. Bell will ring here pretty quick. My clock is still an hour behind. I don't know why.
One thing, Mr. Hawk mentioned that, I will be 61, or 91 in August, and so this is my grandfather.
I want a picture.